Russia has officially returned to the USSR. Are you going to turn on the internet for me or not, damn it? I came to Kazan and I have no internet. At one moment, Google, Apple, and GitHub all went down simultaneously in Russia. Russians, in tears, immediately rushed to write to the main culprit, Roskomnadzor. However, the response was in their usual style. We didn't block anything, you just imagined it. Of course, we just imagined it. The three biggest services on the planet just decided to break down at the exact same second, completely by accident and without any conspiracy.
I just wasted an entire day in Moscow. I'm sitting here right now and damn it, my time is ticking away. All my procedures, all these fucking lamps for today, these fucking geolocations. Honestly, I have no fucking idea how anyone can live here.
But in some Telegram channels, they're already pointing to ironclad proof of an intentional ban. So why is Russia really cutting its own citizens off from the global network? It's simple. We've seen this before. It just used to be called something completely different. Well then, let's figure it out. So let's go step by step. On the morning of July 14th, monitoring services like Down Detector and SBOY, RF started recording a flood of complaints. And not just from a single city, but simultaneously from both Moscow and St. Petersburg. Google wouldn't search, Apple.com wouldn't open, and GitHub wouldn't let people access even their own repositories. In other words, developers couldn't access their own code. Imagine the level of drama. You haven't broken anything, but you can't get into your own project. Along with the big three, Samsung also got caught up in the mess. So even those who had nothing to do with it suffered. And while users were tearing their hair out, Roskomnadzor calmly told journalists, "We're not restricting anything." That phrase is basically their mantra. They already said it back in May when they complained about GitHub. And back then, they also weren't restricting anything.
Lately, when I read the news, I get the feeling that everything happening now shouldn't actually be happening. It's as if I've ended up in a different reality.
The funniest thing about this situation is that even the companies themselves haven't commented on what happened to them. There hasn't been any official explanation from Google, Apple, or GitHub. The status pages of the services themselves showed that everything was working fine globally. The problem was specifically at the entry point to Russia. So everything is fine in the rest of the world, but at the Russian border, for some reason, the technology collectively decides to stop working for exactly a couple of hours, not a minute more. But here's the catch. Real technical failures don't work like that. Google, Apple, and GitHub are three completely different companies with different servers, different infrastructures, and engineers on different continents. For all of them to break down on their own at the same time? Maybe that does happen, but not when just a week earlier, a law came into effect that literally forbids websites from offering login via Google, Apple ID, or GitHub under threat of a fine of up to 700,000 rubles. An amazing coincidence, isn't it? So amazing, in fact, that the Telegram channel Karax wrote plainly, "It is precisely the simultaneous unavailability that reveals this is not a malfunction, but a network block."
The absence of both blocks and mobile internet slowdowns is a matter of security. It's a question of whether you're sitting in the center of Moscow or in the center of any city and nothing is flying at you, or whether drones are flying at you. That's the real question.
But now let's talk about the most interesting part. A few days before this, the Federal Anti-Monopoly Service gave Apple an ultimatum, and the deadline for it literally expires tomorrow. So the company is being pressured by the law and randomly disconnected at the same time. A beautiful composition, no doubt about it. And this is far from the first warning sign. It's just that before it was quieter and affected not Google or Apple, but ordinary Russians who suddenly found it difficult to call their relatives abroad. Until recently, there was a small loophole in Russia for those who wanted to stay connected with the world despite all the bans. A foreign SIM card or a European SIM card in roaming. Say a Russian goes on vacation to Turkey, inserts a foreign SIM card, and there you have it. Free, uncensored internet, even if just for a few days. In other words, even if you buy yourself a SIM card for a month, you'll still be sent back to the same roulette with the same list of restrictions. At the same time, they closed another loophole. Mobile operators were forbidden from topping up Apple ID accounts using phone balances, and some Russian services even started banning users who have VPNs enabled. So now, simply trying to protect yourself from censorship is grounds for being banned. Moreover, the free and popular VPNs that you could simply download from the App Store or Google Play are now mostly either blocked or work only intermittently. You have to look for something more complicated, something that disguises itself as regular traffic.
Stability is extremely important. Look, there's tension, turbulence, and explosions all over the world. But here we have stability. This is something we need to value and try to ensure that based on this stability, we can achieve development.
And here we gradually approach the main parallel of this episode, because all of this isn't just about websites. It's about people who want to call their relatives abroad and can't. In the Soviet Union, if someone wanted to call relatives abroad, they had to go to a long-distance telephone station, order the call in advance, wait for hours, sometimes even days, and all the while knowing that someone was listening in on the conversation. Inconvenient, slow, under surveillance, but at least theoretically possible. Today's Russia has managed to make things even worse. Now, you often can't even order such a call because either there is no access to communication services or there is no internet at all. Progress, in a word. Officially, all this is presented as security measures against drone attacks, but in practice, for people, it looks like this. Taxis don't work, food delivery doesn't work, payment terminals and even ATMs don't work. And they rarely warn about this, and never with specific times.
Fullness of light. How?
Well, damn, uncovered. Unbelievable. What? Cards don't work? Nothing works, not even ATMs? Even in Pyaterochka, nothing works? Alright then. Weeks without stable communication, this is no longer an exception, but the norm for dozens of regions from the border areas to Kamchatka and Sakhalin. Press Secretary Peskov responds to all this in his signature style.
All actions are carried out in strict accordance with the laws adopted by the legislature. If you ask, how long will these actions continue? As long as necessary to implement additional measures to ensure the safety of our citizens. I think even the citizens cannot have any doubt that the main priority is ensuring safety.
And the head of the Central Election Commission, Pamfilova, urged Russians not to whine, but to consider what is more important, their own access to the internet or saved lives. And here, perhaps, is the most vivid illustration of this entire narrative. So-called white lists are lists of services that continue to operate even when the rest of the internet is shut down. Government services, banks, marketplaces like Ozon or Wildberries, and social networks, of course not Instagram or Facebook, but VKontakte and Odnoklassniki. In other words, the internet seems to exist, but it simply consists of a list that the government has prepared and approved for you in advance. This is literally the same logic as with the newspaper Pravda in the USSR. You do have access to information, but all of it passes through a single distribution window, and that window is controlled by the state. And to prevent local authorities from getting too ambitious, it's practically impossible to add regional services to these whitelists on their own initiative. A complicated approval process with the FSB gets in the way. So even when it comes to creating their own small permitted menu, the regions don't have complete freedom. In any case, the final say belongs to the security services. And to ensure that this window could be completely closed at any moment, back in November 2025, the government approved new rules for centralized management of the communications network. They came into force on March 1st, 2026, and officially granted Roskomnadzor the authority to redirect traffic, slow down or block specific resources, and if necessary, completely isolate the Russian segment of the internet from the global network. In other words, the button has already been built into the wall. The only question is when they will press it. And deputies are already hinting that this could happen, for example, during the State Duma elections this fall in the event of attempted interference. So let's return to the question we started with. Is this an official return to the Soviet Union? The short answer, yes, and even a bit worse, because back then the Iron Curtain was ideological. The state openly said, "Agi, we are protecting you from the harmful influence of the West. Here are the jammers and the line for the long-distance station." Now, that same curtain is technical, and the state doesn't even have to openly admit anything. It's enough to say, we're just having a malfunction, and the curtain remains in place while officially it seems like it doesn't even exist. In the Soviet Union, at least people knew the rules of the game. There were things that were forbidden, things that were allowed, and the boundary was more or less clear. Today's Russian lives in a situation where the boundary shifts every day without warning and always in the same direction, toward less connection with the world, fewer opportunities to call loved ones, and less access to information not approved by the state. Today, Google and Apple went down for an hour. Tomorrow, they might go down for a week, and the day after tomorrow, they might simply never come back online. So the question is no longer even, will there be an Iron Curtain? The question is, will Russians even notice the moment when it finally closes if every next step is presented to them as a temporary technical glitch? Well, that's all from me for now. Give us a like, subscribe to our channel, and share your thoughts in the comments about what you've heard. I'll be happy to read everything. See you in the next episodes.